Rogue planets are cold, abandoned, desolate wastelands floating around the universe with no star to orbit and no chance to support life. These planets were actually a very recent discovery, and while we at first thought they were rare, more recent data now indicates that there could be billions within our own galaxy. Since then, they have captured our fascination, and we've developed 4 theories to explain how they could come into existence. The first is they just formed that way. There are areas in space called stellar nurseries, where gas and dust coalesce to form stars and other bodies. It's believed that a planet could form there that simply didn't end up in the right place at the right time to become part of a solar system and simply drifted off. The rest of the theories involve a planet once being part of a solar system but getting ejected for some reason. If a star goes supernova, its planets lose the gravitational forces that held them in their orbits and drift out into space. If another star passes too close to your solar system, it can destabilize orbits and cause planets to break free and exit the system. The same thing can happen if a large planet gets too close to a much smaller one. So of these 4 theories, the first is probably the least realistic backstory for a fictional civilization that's found living on a rogue planet, because if a planet formed rogue, the conditions would likely never be right to support the development of life. I would say the supernova situation would probably be the second least realistic, or at least would be a worse situation than the other 2, because a supernova would burn off the planet's atmosphere and expose it to crazy amounts of radiation that would be a big problem for your fictional civilization. The other 2, while still extremely bad, are better because the planet might get to keep its atmosphere, which gives it slightly better surface conditions. The surface of a rogue planet would be inhospitably cold, and from the outside, this planet would look like a dead, icy moon. If a surface-dwelling civilization survived whatever events led to their planet becoming rogue, it would likely be due to being very prepared and able to move underground. Beneath the surface, your planet's core would still be producing heat and energy, and while this energy would not come close to being a replacement for the sun, it would be enough to sustain liquid water and survivable temperatures. In order to give your fictional civilization the best shot possible, I'm going to assume that they were able to predict the events that led up to their planet becoming rogue with hundreds of years to prepare. In this case, they could potentially dedicate generations to building and furnishing underground bunkers big enough to sustain the vast majority of their population, but resources would be tight. It seems like a bit of a pessimistic take, but I would have to imagine that knowing the surface was doomed, most if not all conservation efforts would be abandoned, and your civilization would harvest anything and everything they could to store for later use. After all, what would be the point of leaving a forest to be encased in ice when you could save the lumber to sustain the population? If hundreds of species of plants and animals couldn't reasonably be moved underground and were going to die anyway, wouldn't it be better if those lost lives could in some way be used to nourish the lives that could be spared? These would be difficult decisions to make, and your world's leaders would have to be extremely cooperative to make those decisions in an organized and ethical way. It's much more likely that resource wars would break out, and that instead of focusing on global survival, small groups would fight to ensure their survival at the expense of others. A lot of resources would likely be wasted by people who don't care about future generations at all and think that if the world is going to end anyway, they may as well give themselves the best life possible. There would be something sort of morbidly interesting about discovering a rogue planet that had clearly at one point sustained an advanced civilization, and upon further investigation to discover that they'd started to prepare for their planet's demise, but instead had torn themselves apart through war before the rogue event had even occurred. I would love to imagine that if modern humans discovered something like this, it would shock us into being more cooperative, but maybe that's just me being optimistic. So supposing your fictional civilization was organized enough to not kill each other off and did have enough time to prepare for their planet becoming rogue, I would have to imagine they'd have 2 main priorities. One would be preparing underground bunkers, figuring out power, infrastructure, communication, sustainable food sources, that sort of thing. The other would be space travel, because even if they could set themselves up well enough to survive underground for thousands of years, they would likely want future generations to one day be able to walk the surface again, and that would require either finding another star to orbit or finding another suitable planet to transfer to. Interestingly, once a planet goes rogue, it kind of becomes a giant spaceship. It's not completely implausible that a sufficiently advanced civilization would try to equip it with solar sails or some other method to control its trajectory through space. It would be very important for them to know where they're going and what they're likely to encounter along their path, both to keep themselves out of danger and to potentially pick up valuable resources from other celestial bodies they passed. But space is huge, and unless they were incredibly lucky, they couldn't count on their planet simply drifting into useful territory anytime soon. So they would need to dedicate a lot of resources to building a robust space program that was able to make the most of whatever they could get their hands on. This could mean sending ships out to start terraforming a planet or moon in a nearby solar system, getting it ready to transfer people onto it when they got close enough. This could mean conquering a nearby world that was already inhabited, or enlisting their help and working out terms for immigration. I said previously that it might be nice for your rogue planet to have retained its atmosphere, but when it comes to space travel, it would actually be preferable to not have an atmosphere, as this would make it significantly easier to take off and land back on the home planet. In the next video, I'm going to talk more about what life underground would be like, and in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and let me know in the comments what types of planets you're most interested in hearing about. This channel is super small at the moment, so your chances of being noticed and having your ideas featured in future videos are very high, so I'll see you in the next one.